So, Patrick, your name has more or less been synonymous with Operation World from the beginning. How did this ministry actually originate?
Well, God called me to Africa in he called me in 1960 when I was at university in Bristol, England. But then he led me into a little mission called the Dorothea Mission, which worked in South Africa. And the great passion of that mission was evangelism and prayer. And in 1964, I was asked to go to Kenya for a bit to work with our little team there. And we had a week of prayer for Kenyan Christians to pray for the world. But we realized how little information we had. So I put together about 8 sheets of information on A4 size paper and typed it out. And this became the basis of the things we prayed for during that time. And it worked so well that when I got back to South Africa, Hans von Staden, the leader of the Dorothea Mission, asked me to do something a bit more for our other weeks of prayer which we held around Africa and Europe. And I put together a little booklet of 30 pages, covered about 40 countries, I think.
Right.
And it then became the basis of information for a lot of those weeks of prayer that we held.
And when did this initial 30-page booklet come into being?
That was 1964-65.
Okay.
And the 64 was one that was run on a Gestetner machine, and 65 it was actually printed in Germany, but in English.
Right.
And then after a few years, Hans von Staden said to me, "Patrick, you really ought to do that book again." And I said, well, if I do it again, I will really need to cover all the other countries I didn't cover before. I didn't realize what I was saying. I was then working in the land of Zimbabwe, which was then Rhodesia, under the white minority regime. And sanctions were imposed on the country.
That's right.
And I couldn't write to many of the countries where I needed information. And actually one of the ones that was a conduit for me was Leslie Brierley of WEC.
Okay.
And he then passed on letters, and I then got the information back again. And gradually I was able to compile the edition that we produced in 1972.
Quite remarkable that you're even able to do that, given the isolation, geographically speaking, but also diplomatically and politically speaking of the country.
That's right. And we had no libraries in the country of a missiological nature. And so it was difficult. And it's amazing to me that we were able to produce a book like that.
Indeed.
In such an isolated situation. And to me it's interesting that the 2 great volumes of research that are used in the world were both produced in Africa, the World Christian Encyclopedia and Operation World.
Both birthed in Kenya, in fact.
No, well, yes, that's right. Yes. I hadn't thought of I was thinking more of the South Africa side. But when we printed it, it was printed on our little mission press in Pretoria. And the printer I was just speaking to a few days ago, and he had to typeset it in lead. He had one of these hot lead machines.
Old movable typeset.
Yes. And he put it together, and all round the back of his print shop were these blocks for the Operation World to print it. And he did it on a Heidelberg printer.
Wow.
And we produced about 3,000 copies, but only after we'd printed it did we find that there was a law in South Africa, a closed shop union situation. A book could not be commercially sold that was not printed by union members.
Whoops.
An awful situation. So we had to give the book away. And so I gave a copy to Ralph Winter.
Right.
And that became the
World Handbook for the World Christian.
That's right. And then we sent a copy to George Verver, and he got so enthusiastic about it. He said, "Patrick, we must do this again. Do it again, please, and we'll publish it." And so OM, or STL, became the publisher in 1978 for that edition. We had tried a little bit earlier to get Moody Press interested.
Right.
And they wrote back after looking at the earlier manuscript and said, "This book is unmarketable." Later, a director of Moody's said to me, "That was one of our biggest publishing mistakes."
Interesting to hear now.
Yes. But anyway, That was the 1972 edition, which then became the 1978 edition, which went globally. And it was that sparked, really, our leaving Africa and coming into WEG.
Right.